Nights in Red Hollow have always been filled with silences that speak louder than words. The wind often drags dust through the deserted streets, making the windows shake as if the city itself were breathing in agony. But that week, the silence was broken by something no one could explain. It wasn't the sound of hooves, nor the whistle of the wind in the dunes. It was a howl, Dot. At first, I thought they were wolves. It wouldn't be impossible, since the desert harbors its own beasts. But I soon realized something was wrong. The sound wasn't animal, it was human. A long, deep wail that began as a cry and ended in something that sounded like laughter. Basic laughter. Something that shouldn't have been heard at that time of night. Residents came to me the next day, frightened, swearing they couldn't sleep. Some said they heard the howl right outside their window. Others claimed the voice seemed to be calling their names. There was one woman who trembled as she said she recognized the voice of her own son dead for years, buried in the Indian cemetery to the north. On the second night, I decided to keep watch. I sat on the police station porch, my lamp lit and my hand firmly on my holster. The howl came suddenly, cutting through the air like a razor. This time, it wasn't just one howl. There were several echoing together, each with a different timbre. Some wept, others screamed, and one, in particular, laughed in a way that made my blood run cold. It didn't take long for them to realize I was there. The howling fell silent for a moment, only to start again, louder, as if mocking me. I knew these weren't animals. These were people. People who should no longer have a voice. The desert has its own way of exacting the blood it was robbed of. And that night, I understood we were about to pay the price. But what no one imagined is that the howls didn't just come from the desert. They were already inside Red Hollow Dot after the second night. I could no longer pretend it was just lost wolves. There was something human about those howls, something that spoke to the heart and hurt the soul. I decided to follow the sound to the edge of the desert, where the hills hold secrets no one likes to share. I carried only the lantern, the revolver, and the weight of my badge, which already felt hotter than it should have. The wind was still, but the air had a strange taste, like iron and smoke. As I walked, I realized I wasn't the only one listening. The houses along the way were dark, but through the cracks in the windows, I saw watchful eyes, entire families awake, praying quietly for the night to pass. When I reached the ancient trails, I realized where the sound originated. They were old routes, paths long used by settlers who crossed Apache territory. Ancient stories tell of many innocent deaths there. Indians ambushed, travelers plundered, entire families vanished without a trace. And now, it seemed every forgotten injustice echoed back, like a chorus of pain. I stopped at a higher point and stood still, just listening. The howls didn't come from one place. They spread across the desert, emanating from different points, as if surrounding Red Hollow. Each voice held its own pain. One cried like a child, another screamed like a man being stabbed, and there was a howl that seemed to cackle as if death were a cruel joke. The more I listened, the clearer it became that these weren't just sounds. They were memories. I closed my eyes for a moment, and something even stranger happened. The howls seemed to transform into words. Not all of them, but fragments. Help, blood, why, justice. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized they weren't just echoes. They were voices crying out for answers, and I was hearing every single one. I kept moving forward, and then I saw the impossible. On the stones beside the trail, deep marks scratched the ground, as if claws had scraped the rock. But they weren't animal claws. The marks resembled letters, ancient symbols, almost like hastily scrawled inscriptions. I bent down to get a better look, and the lamp's flame flickered, revealing designs that looked like eyes and mouths open in a scream. The wind blew again, bringing sand with it along with the howls. And I swear, at that moment I felt something approaching, invisible, heavy, as if a crowd were passing by me without a body. The air grew thick, difficult to breathe, and the howls grew louder, until they became deafening. My knees buckled, and I had to dig my boots into the earth to keep from falling. It was as if the entire desert was screaming inside my head. Then, suddenly, silence. The lamp nearly went out, and the sound vanished as if it had never been. But I knew. The desert hadn't gone silent. It was just waiting. I walked slowly back to the city, feeling the invisible gaze follow me. That night, I understood that the howls weren't simple warnings. They were calls from souls still wandering, demanding someone to hear them. And for some reason, I didn't yet understand that someone was me. On the third night, I didn't wait for the howls to find me in Red Hollow. I mounted my horse and headed toward the hills, where the desert opens into silent clearings and rocks that seem to carry centuries of curses. I knew it wasn't safe to go alone, but I also knew no one else would dare accompany me. The entire town was gripped by fear, and even the toughest men locked their doors at nightfall. I rode slowly, the lantern strapped to my saddle, illuminating the narrow path. The silence seemed heavier than ever. Then, without warning, they began. The howls. First one, a solitary one, coming from the darkness. Then another, closer, with a timbre so human it sent shivers down my spine. Soon others came, joining in, creating a symphony of pain that filled the air. It was as if the desert itself had gained a voice. I dismounted and continued on foot, trying to control my heart, which was beating too fast. I walked a few meters until the light from the lamp revealed something ahead. Eyes, several eyes glowing in the darkness, reflecting the flame like small, opaque mirrors. Pack watched me, silent, just waiting. I approached cautiously, and it was then that one of them howled. But the sound wasn't animal. It was a human scream, deep, like someone being torn apart in agony. By another wolf responded, its mouth releasing a cry that sounded like a woman's wail. The third let out something even worse, a laugh, hoarse and sick, that echoed off the stones like a mockery. Each of them carried a different voice, as if they were walking coffins of trapped souls. My knees weakened, but I stood firm. I touched the badge warm against my chest and realized they knew who I was. They weren't coming to attack. They just howled, releasing their horrible voices as if wanting me to hear every detail. And I did. Amidst the howls, I could make out words, names, curses, pleas. I recognized one of them, and my blood ran cold. It was the name of a man I had buried years ago, unjustly killed in Red Hollow. The pack stepped forward, the lamplight illuminating their dark, shaggy coats covered in dust and scars. They were no ordinary wolves. Their eyes held no gleam of life, but rather the dullness of those who had already crossed over. Each open mouth seemed to hold not teeth, but trapped screams, trying to escape. I raised my hand, not in threat, but in surrender, baiting back down. They surrounded me slowly, silently, and then howled together. The sound was so loud it made the stones vibrate. There, in that forgotten clearing, I understood the truth. Those wolves didn't live in the desert. They were the desert itself, shaped by the pain of every wronged soul Red Hollow had tried to bury. I stood, surrounded by the pack, listening to the chorus of human voices that should no longer exist. And I realized that from that night on, I would never hear a howl quite the same way again. I returned to town with the howls still burning inside my head. I knew I needed answers, but no one in Red Hollow would dare talk about it. So I headed north to a lonely hut of mud and stone, where an old Native American shaman lived. They said he was the last of his lineage, a keeper of secrets that time had tried to bury. I found him sitting before a small fire, his eyes closed, murmuring words in his ancient tongue. I waited until he lifted his head and looked at me, as if he already knew why I had come there. I saw the wolves, I said. Bye. They don't howl like wolves. They howl like people. The old man didn't seem surprised. He just nodded slowly, his voice hoarse, cracked with age. They're not wolves, Sheriff. They're living prisons. Spirits chained in beast skins. I sat beside him, letting his words sink into me like stones. The shaman told the legend of a bloody time when settlers massacred warriors, women, and children on these very routes we now cross. There was no justice. There were no rites of passage. The bodies were left to rot in the sun, and their souls wandered restlessly. The desert, enraged, transformed these laments into living form. Not into men, but into wolves. Every howl you heard, he said, blowing ashes from the fire, is a scream that was not heard at the moment of death. They don't hunt meat, they hunt memories. They need someone to hear their pains, or they will continue to prowl until they drive everyone who lives here mad. The flames danced in his eyes, and for a moment I had the feeling that he himself carried those voices within him. They already know who you are, Sheriff. If they howled your name, it's because they want you to carry their burden. You don't face animals who face the memory of the desert. I left the cabin in silence, feeling as if something bigger than myself had marked me. The echo of the howls no longer seemed to come from far away. Now, I heard them inside my own chest. After my conversation with the old shaman, I began to hear the howls differently. They no longer sounded like distant threats, but like the screams of people trying to cross the earth to speak to me. And that week, all of Red Hollow began to feel the weight of the curse. As the sunset howls filled the city, it wasn't just one or two, it was a whole pack surrounding the houses, prowling every corner, as if trying to drive everyone into their own fears. Residents locked their doors and windows, but it was no use. The sound slipped through the cracks, entered dreams, shattered any peace. One night, I walked through the deserted streets and saw people crying behind curtains, covering their ears. The howls grew so loud they seemed to come from within the walls. These were not sounds to be ignored. They were human voices, crying out for vengeance. I decided to face the pack alone. I followed the tracks to an open, moonlit field. They were there, waiting for me. They formed a circle around me, howling in unison. Drew my revolver and fired at the first one that approached. The shot echoed across the desert, but the wolf didn't fall. Its body dissolved into dark dust, then reformed itself, as if the bullet were nothing more than wind. It was then that I understood the truth. I wasn't facing flesh and blood, but living memories, trapped in animal form. There was no way to kill them with lead. They were older than any weapon I carried. The wolves took a few steps forward, their open mouths mixing howls with human voices shouting my name. The air grew heavy, difficult to breathe. I felt the badge on my chest heat up again, like a burning brand. They were surrounding me, not to kill me, but to choose me. Wolves surrounded me on all sides. Their open mouths bared sharp fangs. But what chilled my blood most wasn't their teeth. It was their voices. Each howl carried the sound of someone gone. The voices of men, women, children. Some wept, others screamed, and a few laughed as if mocking me. I stood firm, but inside I felt like I was being torn apart. When everyone howled together, the sound merged into a horrific chorus. And amidst that symphony of pain, I heard something impossible. My name, not shouted by just one person, but by all of them. At the same time, Elias, my knees nearly buckled. I touched the badge on my chest and realized it burned like a coal. I understood then that I was no longer a mere observer. I had been marked. The desert, through those wolves, had chosen me as the guardian of memory. They didn't attack me. They just continued to howl until the entire night seemed filled with human voices trapped in beast skins. Then, little by little, they faded into the darkness, leaving only a heavy silence. A silence that screamed louder than any sound. I returned to Red Hollow alone, certain that the curse was endless. Now, every time I hear a distant howl, I know it's not an animal calling its pack. It's the souls of those wronged, demanding my attention. reminding me that there is no rest for those who die without justice, and that the sheriff of this town now bears the weight of that secret. If you also heard the howls with me tonight, leave a comment telling us what you think they want. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to continue following the curses that haunt Red Hollow. And be careful, the wolves may be howling near your house right now. Click on the next video that's already on screen before they call your name too.